Alright, class. Welcome everyone to Future Redeemed, a lecture on the Xeno timeline so far. So, as everyone here in class is aware, I've so far presented a 4-part lecture series on 3 of the Xenoblade games. Just because of scheduling conflict, that's kind of how it worked out. But for you on YouTube, you've not seen any of this. This is now lost media. Maybe more accurately, media that was never created. And it was a live event. So yes, question so far.
Can we have a project Rainfall for these lectures?
No. I will never do... Well, never. Okay. Not... Yes, question.
Can you make some merchandise for this that drops important lore that isn't anywhere else?
Yeah, I'll have a model kit after that will explain some things further. So I presented to everyone in class basically lectures on the first Xenoblade game, Xenoblade X, Xenoblade 2, and then some of the extra stuff leading to Xenoblade 3. This was presented a week before. Basically everything I knew and the knowledge I could impart to my class and get them excited for it. There were many goals for this lecture. Ultimately, it more served as just a general guide to what happens during the game, but some of the things I was, that wanted to present about was some of the history about everything that, goes into these games, the Xenoblade games in particular. Some of the themes and stuff, some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, but one of the other goals, of course, was to present a timeline of the Xeno games based on information, that I had so far, and kind of loosely piecing things together. Some things it gives to you, some things you gotta piece together. So the purpose of this lecture is, with the new information, with Future Connected released a little while ago, and all the information that 3 in that game brought, we are going to once again piece every little bit of scrap of information we have and try to create a Xenoblade timeline. But we're also going to incorporate all the other stuff that they had before, at least the main stuff, and try to see if we can make sense of everything that they've given us so far. So, if you are watching this on YouTube, it's going to be tough to discuss a timeline without going into spoilers for it. I'm not going to go into nitty-gritty details explaining the games bit by bit, but it's going to be a general overview and present just enough information to piece together how all these games may or may not connect. So, you have been warned. You could still watch this and get plenty of enjoyment out of the games, but if you are aware of some of this stuff, you could be like, oh yes, this and this connects. So, there you go. Before we dive into it. So, 2 big things that I outlined at the beginning of the first part of the lecture series that connected it. There were a couple other things as well, but some of the big ones were the destruction of the Earth and the Zohar, or the Conduit. And you can see each of the iterations from the 3 series. And these are going to be sort of the things that things that appear in all the games that we could use to maybe try to connect these into one cohesive narrative. This was in the original lecture series that I started several years ago. This was sort of the idea that I was building up to. I don't necessarily agree with that this is how things are, especially with new information, but this was kind of what I ultimately ended up with as a timeline. With Xenosaga all the way at the beginning, the Xenoblade games, the main Xenoblade games, all connected together for each other, and being all together. Xenoblade X happening a little bit later, and then the timeline ending for everything that we know so far for Xenogears. And we will see how this may be right, how this may be wrong. It's probably wrong, but how this exactly works. So we will start at the very beginning, the first game that what would become Monolith Soft worked on, Xenogears. So I mentioned, and I went over this a couple times in the lectures, Perfect Works, which is a book that was released after Xenogears was released that kind of outlines the story structure that they were ultimately going for, and how it provides a lot of the lore. Xenogears in Perfect Works is outlined in 6 episodes, or parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The main Xenogears game takes place in episode 5, but there are important things that they go over in plenty of detail for 2, 3, and 4. Part 1 is outlined a lot in the Perfect Works, and Part 6 is just kind of, what they were going to do after this, and that we haven't really gone through. So this was the structure that they were going for, and we'll talk about how this applies to the other Xeno games after this. So this is the timeline for Xenogears that ranked up. Obviously, there's a lot more than 5 things that happen. I could go through it and list each individual thing, but this is just the information that's important. So you can see already we're a little bit complicated here. We've got 3 different eras that we're going for. I outlined the AD, the current years that we use here at the bottom, so you can see how each of these references. TC stands for Transcend Christ. EC is the eras that they use for the Xenogears game. I forget exactly what that stood for. So we got our first thing in 2001, a reference obviously, of course, to A Space Odyssey 2001. They find this mysterious object on Earth that is potentially older than the universe. They do some experiments on it. They started by calling it MAM. I forget what the acronym is, but then they call it the Zohar later, and they start, doing stuff with it. In 2510 AD, humanity leaves Earth and transcends or goes into space, and that's when they adopt the TC timeline there. So 2510, that's when that starts. There's about a 4,000 year gap where humanity colonizes the entire galaxy, and there's a bunch of wars and stuff going on it, and so nothing much really happens in this 4,000 year gap that's outlined in Perfect Works. I'm sure you could fill out a bunch of stuff to it, but eventually humanity starts doing some really crazy experiments. They do Project Zohar here in 4765, which is when they were doing an experiment on a planet, and it completely blew up, and the only trace of that existed was the Zohar just floating in space. So things didn't quite work out very well here, and they kind of reworked their plans. 2 years later, in 4767, which, I mean, you could do the math to figure out where that is in 80. It's about 72,000. That's when humanity once again does an experiment with the Zohar on planet Mictum 04 Beta, where they try to combine it with this machine that they built called Deuce. It kind of takes over and it goes on a rampage and destroys a lot of things, but with great loss. Humanity was able to at least stop Deuce in its thing. So they separated the 3 components that were doing this, the Zohar, Deuce, and Katokami, which is kind of this computer thing that is powered by the Zohar and runs everything with it. They transport it on this big giant ship to transport it to somewhere else. And they keep it separate and figure out what they do with it there. But on this ship, Deuce kind of goes out of control, takes over everything. At the same time, Abel, a young boy, sees the Zohar and kind of resonates with it. And I should say that when the Deuce took over the Zohar for the first time and caused all that thing, he needed more power than the Zohar was giving him, so he pulled in this extra dimensional being into the Zohar, got it trapped in there to get more power. So there's this higher being that connects to Abel and resonates with him and chooses him ultimately as the person who's going to free him. But Deuce takes over the ship, he kills everyone on it, and as a last-ditch effort, they crash it into a planet, and that is the planet that Xenogears takes on. And it takes place over 1,000 years. If you assume that the base events of Xenogears takes place, it's exactly 10,000 years. And it's basically this weird science experiment where Deuce is trying to build up humanity so he can consume them and become basically a god. And while this is going on, the Wave of Existence is reincarnating Abel over and over to try to eventually get him to free the Wave of Existence from the Zohar. And that's more or less what happens. Abel, who in at the very end, in episode 5 of Xenogears, as Fei Fong Wong, defeats Zeus, breaks the Zohar, frees the Wave of Existence, and, they all are I guess, live happily ever after on the planet. Why, the Galactic Federation, or whatever the name is called, doesn't find this planet in the 10,000 years, I'm not exactly sure. But, so, Part 5 of Xenogears is, or I should say, Parts 2, 3, 4, and 5 happen here, and Part 1 happens all the way here, and, if they ever made anything more, that would be Episode 6. So that is the bare bones basics. I didn't cover anything really that happens in Xenogears except for a little bit at the end here. So these are the base events that you need to know for Xenogears. And I have a little counter that you'll see as we go through the different timelines. Are there aliens? Xenogears, there are. I've shown here a little creature called Choo Choo, who like joins up with you guys but isn't a party member. I forget what the alien race is called. But there are more or less aliens on the Xenogears planet, and at least this species is sentient. Yes.
Is it relevant that Choo Choo looks like something that a Nopon could have evolved into, given however many thousands of years?
I would bet a lot of money that this was an inspiration for the Nopon. And I think that was funny speech pattern like the Nopon. Yes.
So no Nopon in this one?
No Nopon. And we'll discuss later that some of the names that we see in Xenogears comes back, especially in Xenosaga, but they can't use directly any of these ideas. So Choo Choo, we never see him again. This is the only in this game.
Do you think there is a genetic link between those two, though? Because you put this game really far along on the timeline, didn't you?
So that timeline, I would disregard that idea right now. That is a possibility, but I don't think that's what they're going for here. I don't think they're related to Nopon. I'll see if I remember to talk about what. Well, actually, it's pretty. We'll talk about what the origin is, but I think you can say that these didn't evolve into Nopon, but if Xenogears is on a continuous timeline with Xenoblade, maybe the Nopon eventually became Choo Choo species. So, all right, that's Xenogears. That's bare bones coverage of what we've got here. So Xenosaga. So Xenogears had perfect works, filled in a lot of the exposition for stuff. There's a lot of stuff, like everything before they crashed on the planet isn't relevant at all, but it's just ideas that they had for potential games. And Xenosaga is basically, they took all those ideas. I guess Square doesn't necessarily own Perfect Works, because it's not the game, it's just something that they released after. So they use a lot of the same names and a lot of the same events. Xenosaga has 3 games. There's a codex in the first and the third one, and there's also a lot of additional material. So there's tons of dates and stuff. Everything is very well detailed in Xenosaga, and we will be ignoring most of that because we're only focusing on a timeline with Xenoblade. So, this is from the guidebook for episode 3, so they've got a lot of stuff written down. So, you can see here the Xenogears timeline. I ignored the third era, AD and TC. So, for the purpose of Xenosaga, because all the dates are pretty similar, and it is more or less a retelling of part 1 of Xenogears. So the timelines are all the same. There's nothing much after, and the dates are pretty similar to when the Xenogears planet is formed and when the stuff in Xenosaga ends. So we're gonna focus on this. This is the Xenosaga timeline, and this is in reference. If all the dates are the same, this is where it is on the scale. So, okay, Xenosaga. We got a lot more stuff here, and I've kind of drawn lines between the two that are parallel to it. You can see on Xenosaga we start around 0, 30 to 33. We've got Jesus doing all this stuff. There's a lot of important things to it. It's more of like a Gnostic retelling, I guess, and of course fitting into what Xenosaga does, of what goes on there. But there are some important stuff, and that's more or less where things start happening in Xenosaga. Yes, question.
Is that picture under 4767TC, is that really what the game looks like, or did you stretch that out?
I think that's what the game looks like.
Holy crap!
That's the first one. The first one.
It is widescreen. I'm pretty sure that's a square
It might be a little stretched.
Yeah.
Where she's so wide.
That's not what that was not my doing, but yeah. So that's early on in episode 1. So Jesus in 30 to 33, and I think that's mostly from biblical accounts of when the life of Jesus approximately happened. I don't know if they say those dates necessarily, but that's what's going on. You see Jesus, and he does stuff, or they show what he did in episode 3 of Xenosaga. 20XX. That's the opening scene of Xenosaga 1, where they find the Zohar in lake. I should have written this down, but they find it in a lake in Kenya. And it's 20XX. It's not specific with when exactly this was found. We could, if we're like assuming it's the same, it'd be like 2001. But really, it could be any of those 99 years, and that corresponds with when they find the Zohar in the Xenogears timeline. Same things happen when Earth is lost in Xenosaga. It's 20XXX, so the date is not necessarily clear. When the Zohar experiments kind of go nuts, and there's a disappearing event of the Earth that causes it to go away, and humanity leaves Earth to try to flee this. And the same thing that happened in Xenogears happens in Xenosaga. 2510 AD, that's when they adopt the TC timeline of events. So, in 4747 in Xenosaga, that is the planet Mictum. It's the same name as the Xenogears one, but it's not a parallel event. There is an event with the Zohar that happens, and that causes that planet to get destroyed, basically. So that's that parallel event to Gears. And then 2553, the years aren't the same as they were in Xenogears, and legally distinct because, they don't own this stuff anymore by the time they were making Xenosaga, and they probably never will. The planet Miltia, that is when the machine-like god, and in Xenosaga, it's Omega. That's the robot's name that gets powered by the Zohar. But in the Xenosaga timeline, it gets I think it gets stuck in a black hole, or I forget exactly what it is, but it's basically like this lost planet. And you go to it in episode 2, I believe. So in this timeline, the big robot didn't stop it. It just got warped away, and not necessarily their problem. But so this is where it kind of starts to diverge and does its own thing. 4767, that's the events of Xenosaga 1 and 2. 4768, that's when episode 3 happens. So that is the timeline. So the conflict is that there's these upper dimensional beings called the Gnosis, shown a couple of them right here, that is attacking, and that's basically the conflict of it. And the lower domain, which is the plane of existence we all know and love, is about to get taken over by the upper domain, where the wave existence was from, and that's bad. So the villain of Xenosaga is just restarting time over and over to prevent this from happening. The end of Xenosaga, they stop the bad guy. They are like, this sucks, but we're going to find a way to prevent this from happening rather than just keep getting stuck in this time loop. To defeat the bad guy, there's some losses incurred by the party. At the end of the game, we see Cosmos flying towards Earth. And I should say when they lose Earth, they call it Lost Jerusalem. References, to the Bible and such. But we see her damaged body float towards this planet. And that's the last thing we see in Xenosaga. Yes.
When you say they lose Earth, did it blow up or did they just misplace it on a map somewhere?
So in Xenogears, it's not really specified how they lost it. In Xenosaga, what it was they were doing some experiments on it, and it caused a disappearance event. I think that's what that's called. Where, and the details of that aren't necessarily explained. They had to have some time to escape, or at least know that this was happening. So the Earth disappears, and then at the end it reappears. So
that sounds familiar.
It does sound familiar, yes. So, Xenosaga, aliens. No, there are no aliens. The closest thing is the Gnosis, but those aren't aliens. They're higher dimensional. Well, it's kind of complicated, but they're not explicitly aliens. They look like aliens, and it's a cool like twist on. Yes, question.
They're dimensional aliens, though, technically, right?
They're dimensional aliens, but not like.
They're not living in our same
They're
plane of
not.
existence
Yeah, they're
in
not
space.
really alive.
Right.
So, yeah, they're not. So that's. And this is kind of. We'll start to see the aliens be a sticking point, especially as we get closer to Blade. And trying to get everything to work. There are no aliens that we see, and they've conquered the whole galaxy at this point. The Milky Way, in about 5,000 years, which, however that happened. I guess technology sped up a lot quickly with the Zohar. And in all the spacefaring ones, they either have light speed travel or somehow faster than light speed travel. Like the places they talk about, it's like, you can't get there in 5,000 years at the speed of light.
So they know there's not aliens because they've been everywhere and they haven't found any.
They have a government that basically runs the whole galaxy. And if there are aliens, they're not shown, they're not mentioned anywhere. So presumably there are no aliens. Or aliens worth noting. So that's the Xenosaga timeline. Again, skipping over a lot of the events of the game. There's so much that happens here. And I should mention the Zohar where it is, because that is kind of an important thing in piecing this together. In both timelines, they are kind of lost, but really it's just someone had it in possession in like a locker or something for hundreds of years. In Xenogears, it's a couple hundred. In Xenosaga, there's that 4,000 year gap of nothing really much happening. And right around here, they find that this one cult had it. So they presumably had it for 4,000.
And the cult wasn't doing crazy experiments with it.
No, they were worshiping it. So the point of that is that the Zohar is largely accounted for. I guess when this happens, the original Zohar is trapped in an abyss and they can't use it or do anything. But it is there. It's not gone somewhere else. So. That is Xenosaga. Now we're going to talk about Xenoblade 1 and 2. We're going to talk about these together because, spoiler alert, they happen at the same time. So this is the timeline for it. Whereas Xenogears and Xenogears through Perfect Works and Xenosaga through all the media and stuff that have dates very well aligned. Xenoblade 1 and 2 do not... In fact, I've shown pictures of all the dates that they have here. We start in 20XX, that unspecified year, is when the experiment happens. When Klaus activates there's this war going on in Earth, and this space station, this space tower that orbits or that has a ring around the Earth, is under attack. It has the conduit, which is the blade equivalent of the Zohar in it. They're about to activate Ion, and that is an event that we've seen in Gears with Deuce, in Saga with Alpha, in Blade, the big machine that's going to try to become God. It doesn't happen because Klaus starts the experiment. It causes the Earth to disappear in this time. And that's revealed at the end of 1 and 2, and it's revealed that it caused this dimensional split where parallel events happened at the same time. So... in the year 35, and I've created my own year because this is 20XX, we don't know when year 1 of Xenoblade is. But it's in the year 5000-ish. If you're assuming that this date that they say, 3564, started counting as soon as the blades started, that's when Torna happens. And you only see this in the trailer for Torna. I don't say that year in any part of the game. Jin says the year was 3564. And we know this is consistent with 2 because in chapter 2, I think, Pyra says the current date, Amalthober 5th, 4058. And I pointed out, and I was like, that's kind of weird that she said that specific date. But if you're trying to put together a timeline, these two are key pieces of information. Yes.
So was this month named after Praetor Amalthus?
Yes. It might have been like the Romans when they, once they started, they just named that whatever, but the years are whatever. So, yeah, presumably he named it after himself. Yes.
I'm pretty sure I read it after the fact that in the Japanese version she just says October.
Maybe. It doesn't really matter what month it is. The year 4058, again, we're assuming that 20XX was year 0 up to here. There's about 4,000 years that the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2 are around. So, and I think there's an interview where they say that 2 last about a year. So you're starting to estimate at this point how long these took. If we assume the games for 1 and 2 took a year's time, that would mean they end in the year 4059 of the Xenoblade timeline, and that Future Connected happens 1 or 2 years after this specified date. And that's in the year 6000-ish, like 66 or 67 AD. So that is, and right here is where all the events happen. Again, not going into too much detail, but at the end, they kill Clausen, they kill the guy who created the experiment in 1, and that kills the 1 in 2, and so both of the gods of their world are killed, and Future Connected is an adventure with Melia where there's not too much important happens besides the fact that she becomes queen of the Hyentia, and then presumably a little bit later just the whole world of Xenoblade 1. So that is the Xenoblade timeline with the only bits of information we have to work with. Are there aliens in Xenoblade? The answer is unknown. So you asked where the Nopon come from. Presumably they start coming into existence because Klaus created them. He probably had this idea of this creature before the experiment happened. So he knew about it both times. He was like, I want to create this creature because I'm a god and I can do whatever. So they're not explicitly aliens. And the Fog Beast, it doesn't exactly go into what they are. If you assume they're like the Gnosis, again, they're not aliens. So we don't know. Yes, question.
You once told us that you think Nopon and human have equal levels of intelligence and like social and moral worth. Do you still think they're equal?
Yeah, I think so.
That's crazy.
Basically, I mean, they're sentient creatures, so
they're not as sentient.
They're pretty sentient. Yes.
Do you think it's possible that a Nopon invasion force ended up coming from outside? Completely unrelated to the plans of Klaus.
I suppose it is possible that the Nopon existed prior to this date, and they were... Well, actually, you can say that they probably weren't, because in this cutscene, you see people running around the space station. You don't see any Nopon on there.
What if they arrive from, Neptune after the split happens, and they just invade both dimensions?
If they invaded the dimensions, then that opens a whole can of worms of what that possibility is. There's no indication that is what happened. They would have to, as we'll see later, they would have had to enter 2 separate dimensions independently and kind of create a species from there. So unknown aliens, because we don't see what goes on in space. We see what happens in the dimensions of 1 and 2. So that is all the information, really, that we have to work with for a Xenoblade timeline with 1 and 2. So, some points to address. Let's see if I talked about some of them. Oh, I didn't. Okay. So, Cosmos and Telos. So, they are rare blades in Xenoblade 2. But they are also important characters in Xenosaga. So, if you're trying to piece this together and you assume that the blades are canon... Cosmos was in the base game. She's not DLC. Telos is, so you can maybe write that off. Cosmos are going to have to jump through some more hoops to do it, because they didn't start developing Cosmos until a couple, 12 years, I think, before, in 4765, after 2 years before Xenosaga 1, in the TC era, is when they built Cosmos. And Telos is invented between created in between episodes 2 and 3 of Xenosaga. What Telos was the bad guy of Xenosaga went to I forget what it's called, but he went to this like part of Earth that was like separated a little bit, so he could still like access it, and digs up the body of Mary Magdalene and uses her body to create Telos. It's like 80% flesh. So that's what Telos is. So if you assume they're all in that timeline of AD and they're the explicit years, it makes no sense for either of these characters to be in the world of Xenoblade 2. In the art book, there's also this like short story of them prior to 500 years where they're climbing the tree and the guy dies. It's a very short story and it kind of reads like fan fiction from the character designer. You can see in the art book they talk about who designed it, which was Shion and Alan, I think? I forget. The other guy who did make it in Xenosaga. And you're like, well, that's just the art book. We could ignore that. But in the game, they show a logo, Vector Industries, of a real organization who did build Cosmos in Xenosaga. So how does this work? I don't know. It is a big sticking point in creating a continuous timeline, especially with stuff that happens later. This is, if you're trying to point specific locations on where this is on Earth, they're not as specific in the Blade one. In Xenogears, or I should say Xenosaga, they're explicit about where things happen on Earth. Like, the experiment that caused the Earth to slowly disappear, or just disappear instantaneously, was in Toronto. Whereas this it's unknown where this is. It's in the United States based on the interstate sign. That's not a real interstate, so this is presumably just a made-up city. You could speculate where this might be. This is in the land of Moritha that they go to in 2 of the ruined Earth. So you know, in Xenoblade, they weren't as particular about the hard details. So that makes it not only harder to piece this together, but also kind of, you know, maybe doesn't connect to the real world as much for the Blade timelines. In 1 and 2, anyway. So now we move on to Xenoblade X, which came released between 1 and 2, and that's the more sci-fi exploratory Blade one. Again, we're going to create a different timeline scale because the events of X are very explicit. You could narrow it down even more than this, but this is just 100 years, 2000 to 2100. There are a couple things that you could glean from this. We're going to skip the first part. The opening cutscene starts with an attack on Earth between these two alien species, explicitly listed as July 2054 AD. They are traveling in space for about 2 years. I think they say 2 years, so you could assume it's close-ish to exactly 2 years. So that puts that at 2056. If you do the math, there's this big tower in Xenoblade X that has like a countdown to when something bad happens. And if you do the math for that, you could figure out that the time when they crash on the planet to the end of Xenoblade X is almost exactly 1 year. So you could that's making assumptions for the previous games that each of those games took a year, but this one is pretty close to exactly 2 years. So the end of Xenoblade X, 2057, we learned that throughout the game that humanities are robots. They had the data of their souls, depending on how they define that, and that's completely lost and everything's fucked and they leave it on a cliffhanger. That happens in 2057. In the credits, they say that 30 years ago Elma landed on there. They say again, she says 30 years, not 30-ish years ago or something like that. So you can presume, since she's saying that at the end of the game, that Elma landed on Earth, because she's an alien, to warn them about the attack in 2027 AD. So that's the Xenoblade X timeline. Alien check. Yes, there are lots of aliens that come to this world of Mira. They're all sucked in for whatever reason. There's some shenanigans happen, but, you know, on the alien status, however you're going to work that on, there is aliens. They talk about as well the Samar Federation, which is a descendant of humanity, happened at the dawn of the cosmos, is what they were doing. So there's this mysterious federation. It establishes way back in the past, and maybe we could use that to connect to to the other games. So Xenoblade 3, pretty straightforward. What happens? It happens in a split second in time, some amount of years after the game. So using the information that we have here, we see the picture of Rex with his lovely wives and their children sometime after the events of the game. We don't know exactly when this picture happened, so we can't establish when this happened, but assuming, doing some speculation that their children at the time that this split-second incident of Xenoblade 3, they're about 10 to 20-ish. I would lean closer to 10. So you could say 4069 AD, again assuming that it's all linear events. So a split second, and this is concept art from Neo, who, if you don't know, it's heavily implied to be Nia's child with Rex, and she's pictured there about the same age as Noah, so maybe about 10. So it fits very nicely into the timeline. There's stuff here that you can figure out where-ish this might happen, and again, it is a direct sequel to 1 and 2, so this is a solid event, or a timeline of where the events happen. Here's 1 and 2, and where this might have taken place. But we don't know exactly what year, because we don't know when it happened. So maybe we'll find out in the next one. This is concept art from the art book of Xenogears. You see here a bunch of Zohars. So they had some potentially really crazy shit in the kitchen cooking for this game, and they decided not to use it, just to, not get it bogged down with all the other stuff. But this lecture, we're getting bogged down in. We are digging deep in the roots. So maybe this will come up later. This is probably the Fog King or the Fog Rift, what they were going to incorporate that in. And you could kind of tell this was in Origin, but, just some, they were thinking about stuff then. Yes, question.
Speaking of Origin, when I look back and I watch the opening cutscene for Xenoblade X, and the aliens have all this, like, purple gunk on them and have very, like, Mobius-looking spaceships. So, I don't know what the deal is with that.
Yes, so one of the alien races that attacks the Earth at the beginning is this big purple blob thing, and at the very final level of Xenoblade, the final dungeon, there are these purple monsters. They don't really explain what they are, so, I guess they could be the ghosts, is what they're calling Xenoblade X, but I would say that that's just aesthetic. I don't think there's anything there for the timeline. All right, so we are going to get into the big thing. We are going to dissect in excruciating detail Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed, the DLC for it. And technically 2 scenes, but the big one we're going to delve into is known collectively by the fandom as the radio scene. So, let's get right into it. We start off at some point in the DLC, the party is transported to this vision of Earth before it is destroyed. And they see this thing. And we're going to stop this is the first thing you see. Wednesday, May 16th. So I did a little bit of research into when this might happen with important events, specifically of when the Earth gets blown up in the different timelines. 2054, Wednesday, the 16th falls on a Saturday, so the earliest date predating that is 2046. So maybe that's when this happens. We don't know. We just have this date. We just have a day of the week and the date. In 2510, it doesn't fall on a Wednesday. And in 2526, in Gears and Saga, they have a little bit of time to escape the Earth, and that's kind of when they're gone. That's not on a Wednesday either. So we don't know what year this is, but this is referencing some time, probably, I should say. Okay, so so this scene is a radio broadcast that is going on in the background of 2 characters having a very important conversation, but the eagle-eared viewer is not paying attention to the important plot stuff. They're listening to this radio. So the weather in the Radamathus Authority. So we know that this is the name of the orbital station of the tower in Xenoblade 2 where the experiment happened. And I mentioned this in the previous lecture. This is the Radamalthus, the Greek god of death, and he's got two buddies with him, Minos and I can't read the other one, but that one doesn't come up. So those are the name of the other two towers, presumably. So we know this is close-ish to the tower where everything went down. So we get a view of the city. I don't know why I included that one. So, today's news will be delivered by me, Sienna Morgan. This name means nothing. This does not correspond to anyone in any timeline. It's just a name. But with the additional analysis of political sponsor Barry Lee Crow. Barry Crow Lee, excuse me, is a very important, is the main bad guy of Xenosaga. So it's like, oh my god. No, I'm kidding. That's not actually that. That's another name that doesn't correspond. It's just color. They show the view of this city where Radamalthus is, which will become the land of Mortha at some point, and it looks strikingly similar to the city of 5th Jerusalem in Xenosaga. So, maybe they based it off of... Maybe they did, if Xenosaga is on this timeline, Yeah, I don't think it's coincidental that it's like that. So, they mentioned the Earth Life Colonization Product, 8th Mothership, the Icarus. Michael DM'd me a question about it. He's like, this is Icarus from Xenoblade X. You were so close. It is not... The ship is not named Icarus, it's the White Whale, but the Earth Life Colonization Project is the name of the project when they were trying to escape from space and the impending doom. So that is a very explicit Xenoblade X reference, by name of that. So, taking 4,000 settlers to the Eta Carinae Nebula of the Carina Sagittarius arm of the Milky Way. This is a real place in space. It is where humanity fled to create their capital in Xenogears. It mentions that specifically. So there's a Gears reference for you there. And uncopyrightable Gears reference, I might add. So the Icarus is the 8th ship of Project Exodus. That is another name for the Earth Life Colonization Project of Xenoblade X. It has two names for some reason. Coalition government is, in the opening cutscene of Xenoblade X, they say explicitly, the coalition government knew the war was coming, so that's another name. The governments of Xenogears and X are called something different. So I think that's another. It's either coincidence or like an explicit call to the thing. So 9th vessel departs in July, heralds a new long thing. July 2054 is when the attack happens. Maybe this is just a random month, or maybe it's a very loose allusion to Xenogears. The Philadelphia class mothership is like the class of ship from Xenogears, the one that crashes into the planet. So a tough one to copyright, so they can just borrow that idea. Not necessarily what the purpose of the ship was for, but I think this is, I think this one is more just a reference to it. The radio. So the radio has a logo for Vector Industries, like the big conglomerate that like manipulates everything in Xenosaga. So they had to get the rights to use this logo to put on this radio to unequivocally reference Xenosaga in there. The Saviorite human right protection. The Saviorite rebels are the ones mentioned in Xenoblade 2 as the rebels that are attacking the base. It's similar to the name Salvatore, Salvador, something like that, in Xenosaga. And that is... And the localization for it in different languages is the same name. So I should have mentioned this in the Xenoblade 2 lecture. But this is not only a reference to the cutscene in Xenoblade 2, it is a reference to this group in Xenosaga, and I'll dive into it a little bit because I might explain why this happened. The Salvatores in Xenosaga are designer children, which are genetically enhanced humans, and there's the whole plot. There's lots of plot threads about this organization and the people in it. So that's a double reference right there. Possibility. So they say it's going to fail. It's kind of foreshadowing the impending destruction that's going to cause this war. That's going to cause the events of 1 and 2 to happen. So Dmitry Yuriev, another explicit name. And this one I'm not making up, is a real character in Xenosaga, and he is not the main antagonist, but like the second biggest main antagonist to all of Xenosaga. In game, it mentions that he's hundreds of years. If you're putting this on a timeline, it could also just be thousands of years, and he could theoretically have been around for these events. And he is also like the leader of the Salvadors in Xenosaga. It mentions he's a council person for the Minos Authority. That's another one of these ones. So presumably he runs another one of those orbital space stations in Xenoblade 2. So that's the radio scene right there. People have picked apart that thing, found every reference. The events of Future Connect happen. Matthew saves the day with a big punch, and that's it. They play the credits for this. A nice little thing about this one, it is sung by Joanne Hogg, who did the ending songs for Xenogears and Xenosaga Episode 1. So it's more just a nice little reference to that. Special thanks, Bandai Namco, who owns Xenosaga. So they had to explicitly thank them, as well as in the details for like the copyright. Not only is Bandai Namco thanked, but also Xenosaga. So, they had to... They struck some sort of agreement to get those very specific allusions in there. After the credits theme, you see Jupiter, so you get the idea that this is back in our solar system. You see the two worlds pop into our universe, and they become one Earth. So it clarifies more so what happens at the end of 3. It's kind of left, a little bit ambiguous as to whether the two worlds were merged, but I mean, that would have happened if you follow the logic. And here they show what happened. And at the very end, we see a blue little twinkle of light float towards the Earth. And this is a huge point of contention for fans of Xenoblade, what exactly this means. It lines up very nicely with what happens at the end of Xenosaga with Cosmos, who flies back to the Earth. You see a little twinkle of light. Is that Cosmos? Is the end of Xenosaga 3 the same as the end of Xenoblade 3? Did they happen at the same time? I don't know. You tell me. People also think this might be Elma. They say she came 30 years before, but it doesn't really make sense that after the worlds formed, they figure out the United States and create a government, and they're also like, oh, by the way, these aliens are going to kill us. So I think it's fun to think about, especially because all the people who've only played all the Xenoblade games and only get the X references, they're like, oh, maybe this is Elma, and X is a direct sequel to this. I don't think that's the case, but that is a somewhat popular theory. I think it's much more likely that it's Cosmos. And this is a big aside here, but I literally, after I made this last side, I was like, I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to watch the next Gundam Witch from Mercury. And this is the first scene. So I saw this 5 minutes between each other. I'm like, what? This shot looks so familiar. And then I drew a little line. I was like, the curvature of the Earth is very similar to it. Is this a reference to the end of Future Connected? It might. If you tilt the Earth a little bit, then it wouldn't line up. So, yes, question.
Do the land masses line up?
The land masses don't line up. I mean, it's pretty nondescript. What is?
So can we tell? Is the end of Future Connected Earth have modern day continents?
It's very hard to tell.
Okay.
And it's also possible that the land masses have changed so dramatically with a bunch of Titans and the Bionos and the Mechonis. So the land mass might not look the same. You can't really tell. In Witch from Mercury, you can tell exactly where this is. But anyway, that was a big aside. But it was a crazy coincidence. So now we're going to start working on officially putting these timelines together. But a couple contradictions we got to go for to address, to try to make some of these work. The dates. Dates don't exactly line up. The big disappearance event happens in 2510 in Xenogears, in 20XXX in Xenosaga, and 20XX, which, I guess could be the same date as 20XXX, but you're going to have to do a little bit of ironing for these works, as well as the date that I listed in Xenoblade 2, the 4058. If you do the math, that's not the same year that Xenosaga ended. So you're going to have to do a little massaging there. Same name, different events. This is a big thing with Xenosaga and Gears specifically, but some of the things that they talk about in Future Connected, it's like, well, those don't exactly line up with what happened. If you're assuming they're the same thing. Cosmos. Why is she canon to 2? What's going on there? I don't know. So that's a big, like, how are they going to resolve this thing? Aliens. They're not always, there's no aliens in that's a big thing people say. There's no aliens in Xenosaga. It can't be connected to X or all of this other stuff. So, maybe they didn't see them, maybe they didn't mention them. The Gnosis, I talked about them briefly. There's some stuff in Blade that could be Gnosis. There's the Tainted from X. There's the Ghost, the gray aliens, or the purplish aliens that attack at the beginning of X as well. There's also the Fog Beast. All of these may or may not be Gnosis. They could be the same thing, or they could just be their same take of the same thing in different universe, or maybe there's all unrelated. We don't know. And the rights ownership. Square Enix owns Gears, and they only put it in like gacha games every 3 or 4 years, so they don't have to give up the rights to it. And unlikely that they're just going to let Monolith Soft suddenly work with all those worms. So, the timeline theories. This is kind of a listing of all the 4 timelines we've mentioned. All the mainline Blade games are connected directly. The X may or may not be connected. Xenosaga's hinted at being connected. And Gears, there's similar events to Saga. But I would say this is the most likely theory. It's the most boring one, that all 4 of these are just separate, and they're all using names and themes to connect to each other, but they're all separate. So it's the most likely, but I'm personally not a big fan of it, especially after they teased us so much with X. So the Square owns Xenogears theory. No matter what, Xenogears will always be separate from the rest of it, because they legally cannot do anything with this. And this one, you can tack this on to any of the subsequent theories. There's no way Xenogears can directly connect to the rest of the games. The X is on the Blade timeline somewhere theory. I've listed literally all the possibilities. These arrows may not necessarily make sense. You could argue that the 20XX event is the same date that the aliens attacked in X, and they're telling of the same story, but different things. You have to really massage that, because those, even though the same thing happens where the Earth disappears / is blown up, it doesn't exactly work. You could argue that Elma is crash landing on the newly formed Earth at the beginning, which would place the end of the Xenoblade games in 2027 of the Xenoblade X timeline. And that one doesn't really, I don't think that one's necessarily what's going on there. The Xenoblade X one is a distant sequel to Xenoblade X. They use the DNA of humans to repopulate Mira, and then that eventually becomes the Earth of Xenoblade, and then all that happens. They figure out whatever they were doing here, and Xenoblade X is a way distant prequel to the game. Or the opposite theory, that Xenoblade X, or that the Xenoblade timeline is a way early predecessor for Xenoblade X. And that the humans and everyone who came back to the reformed Earth appeared out of nowhere. That becomes Xenoblade X's understanding of the dawn of time. And Shulk and friends are the Sumerians of Xenoblade X. You could tack this one on to any of them, and there's nothing really that's going to contradict us until they explicitly say something. Yes, question.
What's with the kitty cat in the top left?
So the kitty cat, in the final area of Xenoblade X, they show we've got the DNA to everything, and we can create anything. So they make a cat there.
Just for fun? Just
for fun, yeah. And they make it, like the chimeras and stuff that you fight. But, so they've got the DNA of humans, and they just make humans because they're all robots. And those humans, down the line, become the humans of Xenoblade.
I remember you said there's a big server somewhere.
Yes.
That controls all the humans, or has their souls in it. Does that look like core crystals at all?
No.
Is it the same technology?
It's the thing that's shown at the end of Xenoblade X. It's what they're trying to find throughout the game, the life hold. And they find it, and it's flooded and destroyed. So they're like, oh, well, I don't know. It does not look like core crystals, and it came before too, so maybe they didn't figure that out yet. So it's not core crystals. It's not what's in Origin. So you can also fit this in anywhere depending on where you want X to fit, because there's nothing that says one way or the other, except for probably this one. So the one Zohar multiple Earth theory, I mentioned this one was the pet theory, and the title kind of explains my thinking for why I built this. This theory, there's one Zohar in a continuous linear timeline, and there are multiple Earths somehow. So there's the Earth for Xenosaga is not that blows up is not the same Earth blowing up event of Blade. That's not the same Earth blowing up event of X. That's not the same Earth blowing up event of Gears. Yes, question.
So in this sort of timeline, is there like a full reset and regrowth of humanity between each like world destruction, or do they finally get the world back at the end of Saga and they're like, that was crazy, I sure hope that doesn't happen again?
Yeah,
and then Klaus presses the button.
It would be something like that, and the only real reason is if you assume that the Zohar in all of these is the same. It ends with X because the Zohar is destroyed. That the Xenoblade guys are the Samarians who found X, and that Xenosaga is the beginning, because that's when they break the cycle of continuation. And again, there's a lot of... Oh, and this also works with how Cosmos gets to Xenoblade. She crashes into Earth, and like the data from that eventually becomes a core crystal that Rex can use, and that's how that works. So it's a very weak theory. It's like you put a couple pieces together and be like, I'm ignoring everything else. So that's why I'm just sort of explaining how I came to this theory. But we're coming to the real one. The one that everyone thinks this is. The Blade/Saga theory that they all happen at the same time. So I mentioned that in Xenoblade 2, Pyro says a random year, 4058. And that doesn't exactly line up with 20XX plus 4058 does not equal 77 whatever AD. So in this one, you'll have to assume that 20XX is the same as 20XXX of Saga. There's some time before they actually start the years of Blade. Maybe it takes some time for life to begin. So 4058 is like 8-ish, 100 years after Klaus started, after the experiment, he starts to reform everything. And at the end of Blade, that is Cosmos who lands on Earth. They happened at the exact same time. The disappearance of Earth was the same disappearance of Earth event that was in Saga. And the re-emergence of Earth at the end of Xenoblade 3 is the same re-emerged Earth that is in Xenosaga. So, and X is somewhere wherever you want it to be. And Gears, not at all, because they can't touch it. So this is kind of the timeline that we're looking at. Two events that are directly paralleled, and this all happened at the same time. So this is the potential working timeline. We won't really know if this is confirmed until they either, release Xenoblade 4. We'll probably know immediately if this is the case, or if they do something with Xenosaga or whatever. Talking about what's next. After Future Redeemed, it does open up the Xenosaga can of worms. Either a complete remaster or a remake of some kind, or a sequel. I don't think they'd really make a sequel. I think they would, if they are looking at a sequel, they will continue a sequel in the Xenoblade timeline as Xenoblade 4. It could also make Xenoblade X 2. I know they really want to. They have to figure out some things, and maybe they'll introduce information to it. I teased this promotional image at I think the first lecture as, Monolith Soft, they put out concept art for a project that they're working. We have not seen anything about this. I don't even know if this is still going to be a thing or not. So maybe they'll just make a new IP or not. Some questions we got to figure out, what's the deal with this thing at the end? Is it going to be Cosmos? Is it something different? We don't know. There's some unanswered questions in Xenoblade 3, who is Mithra's kid? The popular meme theory right now is that it's Dirk. And you're you might be like me, and you'll be like, who's Dirk? I had to Google who this was, and I'm like, oh my god,
Yeah.
it's my least favorite character in Xenoblade 3. That would be terrible if that was the case. They would have made it more explicit. I don't think we're going to find out until Xenoblade 4. I think they will say this. I think they'll answer some of the questions that are left over from 3. There's a lot of stuff in 3 that even after Future Redeemer, we're just not going to get an answer for. And that's, that's whatever. But I think in Xenoblade 4 we'll get that answer. Maybe it'll tie in with Saga. I think now is the most likely time ever that we'll see a potential remaster for Saga. Yes, question.
How would they even do a Xenoblade Chronicles 4 at this point if the worlds separate back out at the end of 3? Like, which world would they follow?
No, at the end of 3, so at the end of 3, at the beginning of 3, I should say, you see Rex's world colliding with Shulk's world from Noah's perspective as a kid. He sees that coming, and then time stops. And then at the end of the game, time picks back up, so that all the events happen in a split second, and you don't really see what happens. So it's kind of like, oh, what happened at the end, even though they should have merged. In Future Redeemed, they show the two worlds merging, so it definitively shows that they are now one Earth.
I remember them showing that, but I also thought they showed them going apart at the main game, at the end of the main game.
Oh, they had to separate while the credits are going. The two sides of them are chasing each other and they're stretching the hands. The worlds have to pull apart so everyone can return to their worlds, so then that they could be merged back. So they come back to reality.
The future's connected, but in a different way. It merges a different way than all the Z stuff.
Yes, the Z stuff. So that was yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Saga Remastered, that's on the table, and maybe I think especially if you look at the way they handled the Xenoblade Definitive Edition, where they retconned basically nothing, even though there was some discrepancies about how they could link up. They didn't really touch it. So I don't think if they do a remaster, they'll retcon Xenosaga much at all to fit in with this timeline. I think this is most likely just because I want it. But this is that's coming on the table at some point. Yes, question.
If I'm understanding this correctly, Xenoblade 3 is like a dream?
Yeah, more or less. Yes.
Cool.
It's something that humanity has to overcome so the two worlds can merge together. So they can overcome their fears. And it takes untold hundreds or thousands of years.
I see. Okay. I can...
Because they have to kind of undo all of the stuff that happened because of Mobius first, so that the worlds could merge the way they were originally supposed to.
So in 3, the Mobius basically granted humanity's wish of this event of the two worlds merging might kill us all, and we don't want that. So we're just going to live in perpetuity in this. But the Mobius, do some kind of fucked up stuff.
And that wasn't going to work anyway because the annihilation events kept happening even within frozen time.
Yes.
So eventually there would have been nothing left.
There is an eventual time limit to that, so they would have to break it through. Yes.
What happens to Gondor and all the other city people who were born in that world when the worlds separate back out and combine back together with the people who were alive in the normal worlds? They dead?
So it's implied that eventually they will be reborn, more or less how things happen. I don't,
okay.
There's enough generations of city people to where there's no way all those people can get married exactly how they did. But I think that's kind of like the tentative promise, and especially the writers aren't gonna be like, oh, and they're all dead.
I mean,
they'll probably just not mention them.
They did say no matter what future beholds, they'll accept it.
Yeah, yeah. And so if they die, they don't really know, but that's kind of the implication.
And the people that are in the steering wheel of Origin now will probably have a vested interest in making sure things work out so that those people come back.
Yeah.
Because
does Origin even exist then?
So the mechanism for 3, they did make a real Origin that did have all of their souls in core crystals, kind of like what happens in X. They make backups.
Yeah. So
when the two worlds form, this will form into a big cylinder, so that if everyone dies, they'll still have their souls in the core crystals.
Cool.
But that's still not enough for the collective unconscious to assuage their fears.
Cool.
So as a less exciting theory, what if that thing falling to Earth at the end was just the completed origin, dropping down to then restart the world?
Well, then it means nothing. They're just doing the radio scene to fuck with. So this is kind of what we're looking at for the future. And again, all Future Redeemed did to change this is it put anything Xenosaga related back on the table. We'll still have to work with Bandai Namco to work it out, but they are obviously for Future Connected or Future Redeemed in a working relationship, so it's possible.
Bandai Namco also has a pretty good working relationship with Nintendo.
With Nintendo as well, yeah. So if they did remaster, it would probably be a Nintendo exclusive because they're working with Monolith, who is owned by Nintendo, and they're not going to let that touch a PlayStation. So this is what the future is. Those are the timelines. Are there any other questions about any of this, of the possibilities of what I talked about? Yes.
What was up with that no pawn in the corner of the last?
Oh, so that's a meme from, I think, the Xenoblade 2 art book. That's Tora in a thong. So people post that as a reaction image. And there's like a speech bubble. I tried to cut it out a little bit, but people say something like really dumb, or just like anything, and people put this so it looks like he's saying the dumb tweet. I just put that there for fun. Any other questions? Did this somewhat make sense? I tried to lay it all out, and I tried to keep it as simple as possible. But Future Connected really just opened up a whole can of worms for how any of this could be connected. Yes.
Why is Noah Hatsune Miku?
So, this is another meme that I put here at the end. Basically, the fandom is in a huge debate about what Future Redeemed meant. Is it a connection to X, or is it connected to Saga? So this is Cosmos, and this is supposed to be Elma, and they're kissing. So, this doesn't really mean anything. This is kind of the state of the fandom right now. What does any of this shit mean? We won't know for probably like 5 years. And we're just going to have to argue about it. Who's Mithra's son? I don't know. It's dark until they say otherwise, so.
I don't like that.
I don't like that either, but it's like blonde hair. Come on, whatever. Anyway. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you think Nicole has a learning disability?
No, I don't think that. I think you... Well, never. All right, well... Oh, yes. Question and then question. You were Clifford. Yes.
Okay, sorry. I took notes about my thoughts on Xenoblade 3 upon finishing it. Like, in unresolved questions, these probably don't have answers.
If we want to talk about unresolved questions, and especially since they probably don't pertain to timeline, let's save it for the unrecorded Q&A that's going to happen after this. For the quizzes that I had for the previous lectures.
Perfect.
And I'm not recording it just in case some of my answers were wrong. I don't want that to be on the internet forever. I was preaching lies. So you'll just have to assume that the answers I came up with for those quizzes are correct. Yes.
You will definitely be accused of preaching lies no matter what you say.
Well, not in the way that you're thinking. I'm not lying. But yes.
Do you think that Riku is best friends with Cosmos?
He might be. He's friends with powerful people, even though he's just a
ordinary
common variety Nopon. Yes.
When are we getting that Xenogears remake?
Never. Yeah, probably never. Yes.
How does the fighting game Dragon Ball Xenoverse fit into this?
That's a separate lecture. We'll talk about that some other time. All right, everyone. Hope you on the YouTube audience got something out of this mess. Feel free to argue with me about all this stuff, and anyone else who has any opinions about this. And in 5 years, we'll all look like fucking idiots when none of this is correct. Thank you, everyone. Hope you all enjoyed the lecture. Hope you all learned anything. And I'll see you for whatever next lecture. All right. Thank you, everyone.